Hello and welcome to the Daily Sports Report. You are tuned into WCBN FM Ann Arbor. My name is Kelin Flynn. Alongside me today, William Gregory. Super packed show previewing the Michigan State game today. We have an excellent interview with former Michigan State quarterback Jim Miller, getting his sense of what might be on the horizon this year. Got an in-depth look at the Spartan roster and some players to key in on if you're a Michigan fan tuning into this game. William, thank you for joining me today on the Daily Sports Report. How are you?
Doing well. It's a fun interview. If you want to place Jim Miller in the history of Michigan State, shortly after the 1988 Rose Bowl, he talks about his head coach at State, George Perlis, who was the best Michigan State head coach since Duffy Daugherty and Biggie Munn, and then until Mark D'Antonio. He played shortly before somebody like Jeff Smoker, and then it was like early 90s, 93, 94, and then played in the NFL. Played for the Bears from 98 to 02. And then he also worked with George Blaha on the Spartan Radio Network doing color commentary for Michigan State football games from 2006 to 2013, and now he works in radio for the Chicago Bears.
Correct, and he actually played with Harlan Barnett, who's the current Spartans interim head coach, when he was in East Lansing. It was great talking to Jim, and he's a wealth of knowledge and experience. Obviously, getting the opportunity to talk with somebody that's been in that game, a NFL quarterback, a college quarterback that has both won and lost this game, and you just get a great sense of what it's like and kind of the feel for it. So a huge thank you to Jim for coming on. You'll hear that interview just a little bit later in the show. William, what are you most looking forward to, and what does this game mean to you? And I know we've talked a lot about this, but I mean, just let the listeners know.
Well, it means a lot. Talking about George Blaha, I was just on the phone with him today. He is a family friend. We used to go up north and celebrate Christmas together with a few other families in northern Michigan. George also does play-by-play on TV for the Detroit Pistons. He's done so since 1977, and so he's another absolute, fountain of knowledge that I've been able to go to, and I've been very fortunate in that regard. But this game means a lot for me. I went to Michigan State for a year. I grew up a Michigan State football fan, and being able to be at Spartan Stadium broadcasting for, even though it's student radio, just broadcasting in general. After Kelin, we started off doing high school basketball games together, is something that it's a pinch me, I'm dreaming scenario. I would have never thought that I'd be able to come to this moment, especially with Michigan doing what they're doing this year, and it's assuredly going to be a huge game in the history of the rivalry, at least, if not for both teams, then at least for one team.
Yeah, very exciting. I know we've talked a lot about this game and how exciting it is. I mean, we've come a long way from the bowl center standing on two volleyball referee ladders, moving an iPad back and forth.
Yeah, recording on an iPad.
But very exciting. Really excited for this game, and really excited for you to all get the chance to listen to our interview with Jim Miller. So without further ado, here's Jim. Very special guest today on WCBN Sports, former Chicago Bear and Pittsburgh Steeler, but more importantly, former Michigan State Spartans quarterback Jim Miller joins us today. Jim, thank you so much for coming on today and chatting about the rivalry before the game on Saturday. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Kelin, William, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here.
Well, let's just get right into it. Jim, you played in this game, obviously. Went 1-2 against the Wolverines as a starter, including a big senior year win against a top 10 ranked Michigan team. Can you just speak a little bit about the rivalry and just kind of what the rivalry is, what's most exciting about it, and what separated it from a lot of the other intense games you've played in throughout your college career?
Yeah, it's a great rivalry because it's in state, and it obviously is down family lines because my older brother and sister attended the University of Michigan, and here I ended up at Michigan State. So I think it does get emotional. There are people choose sides within family within the state, and so it carries a lot of weight. And you get bragging rights for a year. Let's just put it that way. So I think the whole state enjoys it. Two great institutions going at it that have great, rich football histories, and that's why it's become such a great rivalry.
Well, I mean, I can definitely agree with that. My younger brother goes to Michigan State, and I'm definitely excited to head down there for the weekend and get to spend some time with him, but also hopefully, like you said, have some bragging rights for the next year.
My whole family had gone to Michigan State. I was the resident Michigan State fan in high school, and Kelin and I were going to school together. And I had a good stretch of bragging rights to have about 10 years ago. But nowadays, I guess I'm lucky with this Michigan football team to be here with experiencing that right now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Jim Harbaugh's done a fine job. There's obviously a lot of crossover with coaches, too. Even when I went to Michigan State under George Perlis there, and it's gone back and forth where we've had guys on our staff that came from Michigan or vice versa, where Michigan State coaches have gone over to Michigan. So, there is a brotherhood there. But when it comes to this game, certainly it's business and it becomes very competitive. And it is very, very heated out there, and it can get emotional.
So let's talk about the game a little bit. Obviously, Michigan coming in as the number 2 team in the country, a heavy favorite going into East Lansing, but we've seen it before where Michigan comes into this game as a big favorite, particularly in the COVID year 2020 when the Spartans came into Michigan Stadium and beat a Michigan team that was, I believe, a 17-point favorite in that game. Jim, what have you seen from Michigan this year, if you've been able to check them out on what makes them so good, and then potentially any weaknesses you see that the Spartans might be able to take advantage of?
Well, Michigan is very good within the trenches, and I know Jim Harbaugh talks highly about this year's team because there's a lot of draftable players. And certainly on the offensive line and the defensive side of the ball, they've historically had good offensive linemen and good defensive linemen. They've historically been able to run the ball very well. And so they are a loaded team. That's why they're ranked as high as what they are, but they're not unbeatable. I think, when you go into games like this, you can take the records out of it because emotions do play a part of it, and teams can get the best of one another, especially an opponent that Michigan State knows so well. They face them every year. They know what type of schemes Jim Harbaugh is bringing to the table, and so, they have to attack it, and they've got to play their best game, and they've got to play mistake-free if they're going to come out with a victory.
Definitely. And Michigan State has beaten Michigan 12 times when Michigan has been ranked in the AP top 10, 22 times overall when they've been in the top 25. And there are a bunch of upsets in the history of this rivalry where Michigan State came in without a lot of expectations, beating Michigan. I have a question regarding Michigan State is ranked first in the Big Ten in third down conversion defense. They're third in the country, only behind Utah and Georgia. So can you speak as a quarterback when you come into a game facing a team like Michigan State that once you get beyond, first, second down, maybe you get into a third down and long, playing a defense that is that effective in stopping offenses converting on third down? What goes through a quarterback's mind? Do you have to take easier plays early in the series to counteract a defense like that?
Yeah, it's what we call staying on schedule. You want to be productive on first and second down to avoid the situations that you're talking about where you end up in, say, a third and long situation. If you can stay in that third and 3 to 4 area is where you want to be, or avoid them altogether and be productive and get first downs on first and second down. So I would think Michigan wants to be very good on those early downs so that they don't get themselves in that type of situation. Because I think Harlan Barnett, I actually played with Harlan when he was at Michigan State. He's a fantastic coach, and I think he'll have that group ready to play. They are defensive-minded, and Michigan State has always been defensive-minded, and that is an area that you want to be productive, and they have been all season long. The record may not reflect it, but I think they're going to continue, and they're going to try and do that against Michigan as well.
Yeah, I think you have Cal Halliday on that defense, who's been a linebacker for a few years, experienced, I think. A few weeks ago, he had his third defensive touchdown. He joins only 3 other Spartans to have 3 defensive touchdowns at Michigan State. It was R.J. Williamson, Shalik Calhoun, and one other player I'm forgetting. But talk about him and in this game having to stop such a potent Michigan running attack that I feel like has been slower to start, but has been rounding into form in recent weeks, going over 200 yards a few times in Big Ten play.
Yeah, I would think for Michigan, they're probably, people think you blitz just to get after the quarterback. And I think with the talented linebackers that Michigan State has, they'll have to probably blitz on early downs, and you can blitz to stop the run as well, where you basically shut down a certain gap by the offensive formation that maybe Michigan's in. So I would expect some blitz zones, higher blitzing, more aggressive by Harlan Barnett, and certainly the linebackers will be a part of it, or safeties or even corners for that matter. But I do think Michigan State will probably get more aggressive in that area on first and second down to really slow down a potent running game that Michigan is bringing to the table.
And Jim, you yourself being a former quarterback at Michigan State, obviously the Spartans went with a change last week, bringing in Katin Houser as the starting quarterback, highly touted recruit coming out of California that made his way to East Lansing, and he had a decent outing in the game against Rutgers. Obviously, Michigan State went up to a big lead in that game. Can you talk about maybe what might be going through his head going into a rivalry game and his first game against an elite team like Michigan, and how he might be trying to prepare for this game?
Yeah, I just think for any young quarterback, you just want to go through your progressions. Throw the ball to the open guy, read your hotkeys, and certainly not turn over the football, because I think we know that is the biggest statistic that leads to wins and losses. And so for him, just protect the ball, count on the guys that are around you. Don't try to do too much, and just focus on what your assignment is and what you have to execute. And if you do that and just take it one play at a time, and that's truly how you got to be as a player. And if something bad happens, put that bad play away and don't let it snowball. Don't let one bad play lead to a bad series, which leads to a bad quarter, which leads to a bad half, which could lead to a bad game. That's what we call snowballing. So, just focus and execute on every single play, but do not turn over the football. That is going to be the big key thing for him.
And Jim, Hauser being formerly the backup behind Noah Kim, we see a lot of backup quarterbacks come in and give some energy to teams all over any level of college football. Michigan saw a bit of a wrinkle with the new offensive coordinator that Indiana rolled out, Rod Carey, last week. That resulted in a throwback touchdown, 44 yards, that put the Hoosiers out to a 7-0 lead at the end of the first quarter. It was the first time Michigan had been down at the end of the first quarter this season. Do you think that Hauser being at quarterback adds a little dimension to the Spartans' offense that hasn't been shown on film, that Michigan State can come into this game and do some things a bit differently with an offense that hasn't been up to their standard this season?
Yeah, I think he can, because he's really not on tape. Michigan really hasn't seen him play other than the Rutgers game that you just mentioned. So there's not a lot of scouting on him and what the strengths that he can do and the strengths that he brings to the Michigan State offense. So it's new and it's unfamiliar with Michigan, because normally when you go into a game, you do a 4-game breakdown, and you'll see all the tendencies of your opponent on tape. And yes, Michigan State will stick with the same scheme, but of course, Harlan Barnett and the coaches at Michigan State are going to structure and gear the offense more towards Hauser's strengths. And so that'll be different, that Michigan will have to adjust to as the game goes along. And obviously Harlan Barnett made this move because, one, he trusts Hauser and he wanted to spark. The offense hasn't been consistent enough, and that's normally why you make a change. And we'll see if that change turns out to be effective, and if Michigan State can go in there and Hauser can play a mistake-free game to come away with a victory.
Yeah, and Michigan State does come in with a running back ranked 4th in yards per game in the Big Ten, Nathan Carter, who's been pretty good this season. But you're facing this Michigan run defense that is unmatched almost in college football this season, shredding teams' running game. So does Hauser have a running game to lean on in this game? Carter has gone over 50 yards in every game but one. That was a game against Washington. Can he trust Michigan State's running game and their offensive line to make a little bit of room against this Michigan defense?
Yeah, you would hope so, because history tells you in this rivalry, in this matchup, that the team that runs the ball better normally is the winner of the contest. It's been a long history into this game for a long time. And I don't think Michigan State is going to neglect it. I don't think they want to become a one-dimensional team. That's not who they are, especially with a young quarterback. So they're going to have to force the issue of running the ball. And the offensive line certainly has to be ready to go against a stout defensive front that Michigan's bringing to the table. And again, emotions play a part of that. I remember even back in 1993, Michigan had a very good defense. They were highly ranked, and we put it on them. From the opening drive, we were able to run the ball, go drive the ball 80 yards down the field, and able to get a touchdown. And so you can get that type of momentum. I don't think Michigan State will be intimidated. They know the Michigan Wolverines have a good front, and that's a challenge that they're probably looking forward to. I know we were, and I was back in 1993.
And Jim, obviously coming into this game, Michigan State has not had the year they were hoping for in a hopeful bounce-back year for Mel Tucker, and obviously the coaching situation there has changed. But in a situation where Michigan State might not have as much to play for as the Wolverines, how can that sometimes be a benefit to a team like Michigan State, where they're coming in, they can leave it all out on the line, there's not a lot to lose, you can be a little bit more aggressive if you're Harlan Barnett and try to take some riskier plays to maybe pull something out there at Spartan Stadium?
Yeah, I mean, you'd like to burst Michigan's balloon. You mentioned that. They're second in the country. Michigan State's got an opportunity to spoil the party here. So there's a lot of Michigan fans that would be pretty miserable if you pull away with the victory, and there's something satisfying about that, because every game that you go into, you play to win. Whether the team across from you is ranked high, but because this is a rivalry, I'd want to be a spoiler. I want to spoil Michigan's afternoon. I want to spoil Michigan's season, is how I would look at it as a player or coach going into this contest.
All right, Jim. Well, thank you so much for joining us. William, do you have any last questions before we let Jim go?
No, I really appreciate it. It's always insightful to have a former NFL quarterback talk, especially when we're a station that often needs that kind of veteran knowledge.
I guess, Jim, one last question before we let you go here. If Michigan State is able to get it done and pull out a victory over the Wolverines on Saturday, what's the recipe for success? How does Harlan Barnett get that done? I know Mark D'Antonio is going to be roaming the sidelines with him, and he's somebody that had a lot of success against the Wolverines. What's the recipe for success for the Spartans?
Yeah, I think you got to play 4 hard-nosed quarters, and all 3 phases have to be on point. I think we've seen this game has come down to a block punt for a touchdown. That could decide the outcome in the latter moments of the fourth quarter. We've witnessed that happening when Michigan State went into Ann Arbor, was able to do that with Jackson. And so, just play hard-nosed football for 4 quarters, all 3 phases, and let the chips fall where they may, and just try to play as mistake-free as you can. But they'll bring the intensity, and they'll be ready for this football game to compete. And then if they are able to pull off a victory, it's something you can hang your hat on. That's a signature win that they can now start looking forward to the rest of their season. And if they're able to bring the intensity to do it, that would be the standard for them to really have a turnaround.
And I guess one final follow-up to that is, for a lot of Michigan fans that maybe haven't been able to catch as many Spartan games this season, is there a player that you're looking for on the side of Michigan State to really make a big impact in this game? Can be on offense or defense, but somebody that you think will have their fingerprints all over this game if Michigan State pulls out a victory?
Yeah, I think you mentioned it. They've got to get their ground game cranked up. So Carter has to bring the big boy pads, is what I think. You mentioned 2 years ago, and I remember the year that Kenneth Walker had, and that Michigan State was able to get the victory in Ann Arbor, I believe is where that game was, and he ran all over them. And I think Carter needs to have a big game where you chew the clock, time of possession, wear Michigan down, like you said, and it really is going to be the best thing to help out a young quarterback like Hauser. So I think Carter is going to be a big key component in this matchup.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jim, for joining us today and offering some special insight from a player's perspective into the rivalry and breaking down some of the X's and O's into this game as we get pumped up for Saturday. I know William and I are definitely very excited to be on the call from Spartan Stadium, so thank you so much for stopping by and helping us out.
Well, gentlemen, thanks for having me. Have a good night.
You too.
You too.
Huge thank you to Jim Miller for hopping on the call with William and I and breaking down the game. William, we're going to be there in the press box, well, outside the press box on the photo deck on Saturday night. Really excited for that. Obviously, a big game and something that we both know plenty of people in East Lansing. Of course, my brother goes there, my cousin goes there, two of my best friends go there. So excited to see all of them. But more importantly, I'm excited to call this game. And as we've kind of started to dive into our prep for this game, let's give the listeners a little breakdown of what we're expecting to see and what we're looking to see from Michigan. Obviously, we got more of the Spartan side from Jim, and we're a little bit more familiar with the Wolverine side of things. So let's just get into what we're expecting to see from Michigan specifically.
Well, and I think it's a team a few weeks ago that was banged up. Makari Page, Rod Moore, Mason Graham, they've all shown up in the injury report. Will Johnson. But this week, Michigan is fairly healthy. I think we'd be surprised to see Kalel Mullings in this game. He was not able to play last week, and he showed up on the injury report again. And then I think having Mason Graham fully healthy, you saw what he'd be able to do against Minnesota, even with a club on his hand. Sharing a Defensive Player of the Week award with the Michigan defense. And I think that Michigan coming into this game at full strength is exactly what they need. They do not need to come into this game in a situation where Michigan State, we talked about it with Jim, is able to upset a highly ranked Michigan team once again with a lot of expectations riding on this game.
Yeah, and we talked about a lot of those upsets that have happened in recent years. Obviously, 2020 and 2021, both examples of that. 2020 even more so, with Michigan State rolling into Ann Arbor and beating what really turned out to be a bad Michigan team, but a Michigan team that was favored by double digits. I don't see that happening. I think this is a Michigan team that you can argue is the best since the turn of the century.
Since the turn of last century, all these statistics I've been digging up, it's the first time Michigan has led or has held this many opponents to however many points since 1902. Like, this team is unmatched in the history of Michigan football at this point.
For one, Jim Harbaugh doesn't lose typically to teams that are inferior talent-wise to him, and Michigan State has been the one exception to that rule. I can't really think of a game outside of Michigan State that it's been a team that's been severely undermatched in terms of the stars that have been recruited that Michigan has lost to.
And I mean, there's that saying, throw the records out in a rivalry game. In college football, it's a little bit different because there are disparities like Oklahoma and Oklahoma State where there's a joke about Bedlam that anything can happen in Bedlam. Oklahoma can win by a little. Oklahoma can win by, a comfortable amount, or they can win by a lot. But it's not a game where a team like Oklahoma State can make up the margin in talent. But Michigan State has always been a team that has backing. The state of Michigan is big enough and rich enough in talent and money to be able to support two high-level research universities with two high-level college football teams. And that's shown, I think, Michigan leads the series since Michigan State joined the Big Ten 39-32-3, or at least that was since 1950. Since 53, Michigan is 39-29-3, and that was when the Paul Bunyan Trophy was launched. But Michigan State has won 10 of the last 15 matchups. Obviously, the last year and change has been different in the trajectory of both these programs, but the Spartans are always a team that can put it on the Wolverines' history. Recent history shown this. It's not like it's Minnesota touting their wins in the 1960s and beating Michigan in the Little Brown Jug series. Like
Ricky White came in and
State's done this
absolutely
recently.
torched the Michigan defense in 2020. That, again, turned out to not be that good, but
Ricky White also at UNLV this year.
Exactly.
Didn't play well.
So anything can happen. Kenneth Walker scored 5 touchdowns against a really good Michigan team in 2021, and obviously Kenneth Walker turned out to be...
Should have been in New York that year, to be honest.
Pretty good. Currently tearing it up at the NFL level with the Seattle Seahawks. But with all that said, this Michigan team, William, we've talked about it. You described them as a early 2010s style Alabama pressure cooker in the sense that sure, Michigan might not come out and leap all over you early, and we've seen that this season plenty of times where Rutgers goes up and scores first, Indiana, and then all of a sudden you look up and it's 28-7, and the opponent hasn't crossed midfield in 2 quarters.
Well, and there's all sorts of metrics that I have seen that are ridiculous. Michigan's defense has forced a 3-and-out in every third quarter this season, and in some they've had multiple. They're forcing drives. They're forcing opponent drives to not have first downs nearly half the time. It's like 45% of the time Michigan's opponents are going 4 plays and out, whether that's a turnover or a punt, or a turnover on downs. The defense is amazing. Joel Klatt called him the boa constrictor, and Fox has kind of leaned into that since that happened. They had an interesting graphic of Jim Harbaugh as a boa constrictor on the broadcast last week against Indiana.
I haven't seen that. I got to look that up.
It's pretty funny. They pulled it off well. He's got the hat, he's got the glasses, but then he's also a snake. And there's a ton of other great quotes that this Michigan team has shared. Mike Barrett said in the post-game interview against Indiana, Coach says we're always in the butt-kicking business, and business is booming. Michigan has not beaten 2 Big Ten teams back-to-back, or has not scored 50-plus points against 2 Big Ten teams back-to-back in 40 years. And what this team is doing is unprecedented, but you play a Spartan team that has nothing to lose, like we talked about with Jim Miller, a Spartan team coming in with a backup quarterback that hasn't been on tape as much.
And who has talent. Caden Hauser's by far the most talented quarterback on this roster. I believe he's a high 4-star recruit.
And they've given Noah Kim enough time. He's shown them enough. And they're definitely going to be motivated after dropping a game against Rutgers that they should have won.
And they were in a really tight game at Iowa, too. We caught the end of that game as we were driving back from Nebraska on Iowa radio. I mean, it was a Cooper DeJean punt return
NFL
for
player
a touchdown that separated that game. That is a game that Michigan State really had a chance at winning. But again, it just comes back to the fact that, and we talked about it with Jim, the trenches. Michigan is so good in the trenches, and it's so hard to lose football games when you dominate the trenches, especially if you're more talented than the other team on the outside as well. And I just don't see a path where Michigan State is able to control the trenches against a Michigan offensive line that maybe not as good as last year, but still dominant.
They're rounding into form. I think the insertion of Ladarius Henderson at left tackle is huge, and Carson Barnhart at right. You have the guards.
The guards return, obviously.
And they are possible future NFL players.
And Drake Nugent.
is a good center, too. So this team
I believe he's the number 1 ranked PFF center in the country.
Yeah, he had a great game last week, too. The running game, I think, is better. But the other thing is you don't have to lean on Blake Corum as much as you did last year when JJ wasn't as experienced, because JJ can throw the ball around the football field. We all know this at this point. Michigan is the only team in the country to have 3 players over 2 or 3 position groups that have a single player over 2 yards per route run. Colson Loveland for tight ends, Donovan Edwards for running backs, and Rowan Wilson at wide receiver. No other offense in the country has that level of diversification with as many targets as those players are given.
And depth. We've seen even some of the freshmen make plays, like Samaj Morgan.
And Cornelius Johnson, I think, has been unsung this year in a lot of ways. He made a big grab on 3rd down last week. 3 catches for 86 yards against Minnesota, all in the first half. He had that game against Ohio State.
He just hasn't gotten the touchdowns. Rowan Wilson's gotten all the touchdowns, but you're right. Roman has made some big plays in some big spots on a lot of those deep crossers and posts downfield, especially.
You have so many playmakers. A.J. Barner, I think, is talent. He'd be a starting tight end on any other team in the Big Ten except Iowa, in my opinion.
Probably. Maybe not Ohio State.
Oh yeah. But those are 2 teams that consistently produce tight ends, and Barner. Jim Harbaugh said he's the best run blocker in the country at his position in the post-game press conference against Indiana, and they identified that in him when they recruited
That's why they went out and got
away
him
from Indiana in the transfer portal. So the offense is so diverse. We know what the defense is.
The defensive line, I think, is even more impressive than the offensive line. They've just been so dominant, and they're so deep. Really, nothing you can do if you're an opposing team. Well, that'll do it for us here from Prod A. Make sure you tune in to William and I's coverage of the battle for the Paul Bunyan Trophy live from Spartan Stadium on our YouTube page at WCBN Sports, at WCBN Sports on Twitter and Instagram as well. We'll be blasting out the link on there. Should be a great call. Thank you so much for tuning in. For myself, Kelin, Flynn, and my partner, William Gregory, today, thank you so much to Jim Miller for stopping by, and for Owen Crane back behind the glass, putting this all together.
On the ones and twos.
We're going to leave you, as we always do, with a good night, and go blue.